Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming on this Wednesday night in your evening, and I hope you're in your pajamas. Hope you enjoyed our music. Sorry about the technical difficulties. We're just waiting for Karen to also join us. Um, and we'll talk a bit about this, the purpose of our web chat tonight, and we encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A or the chat, and you can also ask questions anonymously. Just looking at Karen. Are you there?
Yes, but I can't turn on my camera.
You can't turn your camera on. Oh, okay. Apologies. Okay, let's see if, okay, gonna make you host as well.
Yay.
Okay. All right, so let me see. I'm gonna share our screen and we'll get started. But tonight we're here to talk about imposter syndrome. And some people don't know what it is, so we're going to define it, but I'm not sure if I'm happy or sad. This is the most popular webinar. We've had like 30 people sign up for it over the last couple of weeks. So it's a topic of need. And so I really thank you for taking the time out of your evening. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Robin. I am a career coach and I have had my own business for 3.5 years. I grew up in the US. I've lived in Australia for 12 years, got my citizenship a year ago, and I've had quite a few director roles in the US and in Australia, and that caused me to have imposter syndrome in a number of scenarios. And then also I have a blended family, Aussie husband, 3 kids that are 21, 23, and 25. So that's a bit about me. Karen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Karen. I've had a varied career, I guess, as a lawyer and regulatory policy advisor, running my own businesses, as a senior exec, and more recently as a charity founder and CEO. And I guess invariably throughout my career, I found myself in positions where I have no idea what I'm doing. Sometimes because it's never been done before, and sometimes because it's just an entirely new thing for me. And so I think a session on imposter syndrome, particularly at this point in time in lockdown, where everybody's facing uncertainty and everybody's having to sort of find a way forward in uncharted waters, is really, really timely. And I would hope that by just getting a little bit candid and sharing some of our life experiences with you this evening, we can sort of highlight that if that little voice of doubt and underconfidence niggles at you sometimes, you're certainly not alone. And it's a great catalyst for actually working out the need to develop some strategies to help move you forward. So we hope that's probably the result of this evening.
Absolutely. And I guess to give just a bit more context, Karen and I were talking a few weeks ago and just talking about our own challenges that we're facing in lockdown, simple stuff like getting the hair cut. I've got to pin my bangs back, but I did have fun today actually getting a bit more dressed up. But also just managing family and work obligations. And I was ringing around to my girlfriends and checking on them because I have a few single mom girlfriends who are trying to still work from home full time, but also do homeschooling. And one of the moms was just, not at meltdown point, but she was very raw. And she said that she had lost her cookies in front of her girls. And she was just mortified because she's usually calm and collected. And I spoke to her about it and said, you're human and we can't always regulate our emotions. And said that it's okay for the kids to see you in your rawest moments. So anyway, so it just made me think that maybe there's a need for this topic. And so Karen and I have put together some content for you tonight. But it is a timely with lockdown fatigue. We're in Sydney in week 15 of lockdown. And I know people in Melbourne have been in week 8, I think, and lots of other weeks of lockdown there. So yeah, so there's a lot of stressors that are being placed on us because of that. So go ahead, Karen. So the purpose of the session.
I mirror what you've said, that I think, that this session is all about sharing narratives around how imposter syndrome shows up differently in all our lives and can show up in many different ways. And that at the moment, I think there's such enormous pressure on people to sort of pivot their business and parent and homeschool and progress your life plan. And there's pressures coming from social media as well that, well, with all this time in lockdown, when you can't be out wining and dining, why don't you, transform and create your perfect body, or write a novel, or, take up a hobby and become, a watercolorist or whatever. I just think we need to take a sanity check here and say, look, we need to do a lot. We need to be giving to ourselves a little bit more. We need to be supporting our family. We're being asked to support our community. And I think in that, recognizing how that imposter syndrome can turn up in this kind of situation with the voice of doubt that it's never enough, or you don't know what you're doing, just use that. And I think I have now learned to lean into my imposter syndrome and see it as a tool to actually create good in the world and good in my life. So hopefully we can work through some strategies this evening about how we can all do that a little bit better.
Absolutely. Perfect. All right. So let's talk about who has imposter syndrome.
Who doesn't have imposter syndrome, Robin? Who doesn't have it?
Yeah, it's actually very surprising. In doing the research for this webinar, it was surprising to hear people like Albert Einstein has imposter syndrome. And you can talk more about it, Karen, because I would like to hear how you define imposter syndrome.
Yeah, well, I define it as something that affects most of the population. And I think we're in good company, because as you can see on the slide, it sort of affects everyone from theoretical physicists to first ladies. So, I feel well positioned amongst that lot. I think, as I said earlier, it shows up in different ways for different people and at different stages of your life. I think it is that sort of little niggling voice of doubt and underconfidence, of not being enough or not being worthy, or perhaps even being lucky to have achieved that, or it was a fluke and it's got nothing really to do with your underlying skill and effort. And I know a big part of it for me is an inner drive to do more and be more all the time. And, that's something I think that started for me when I was in grade 4. I had a teacher called Miss Charest, and she was the first foreign teacher to hit Carringbar North Primary. And with that Canadian accent, she just seemed very exotic. And in a sea of twin sets and sensible skirts, she, sort of rocked in wearing a maxi skirt and her hoop earrings, and she had a killer suede jacket. And we just all thought she was so fabulous. The boys thought she was pretty cool, but the girls all just absolutely adored her. And in my photo that year, she used to wear her hair in a sort of side ponytail. And in the school photo that year, every single girl has got her hair in a side ponytail. She was the bee's knees, right? She was the bomb. And in my report card that year, the first report card she issued, the half-yearly report that year, and let me just digress. I grew up in a family where there was no huge expectation of me. I was loved, but academia was not a thing in my family. There was no real history of it, so I wasn't really expected to do particularly well. There was no expectation I'd finish high school, let alone go to university. So I was kind of coasting in the sort of mid-range to sort of bottom of the class, and quite comfortable with a life of complacency and flying under the radar. And Miss Charest wrote my report card Karen is a quiet, solid achiever, but if she applied herself, she could be so much more. And I was absolutely gutted. I was devastated because this was my rock star. This was my idol, suggesting I was not enough. And so from that day, I have always had a very strong drive to do more and to be more, and always questioning whether I'm doing enough and my results are solid enough and I'm achieving enough. So that's really how imposter syndrome, I think, predominantly shows up for me. I think earlier in my career, we'll come into types later in the session, but I think, I've gone from sort of being very worried about not being an expert and knowing everything in my field of legal expertise to now knowing the benefits of engagement with others and seeking advice and actively listening to this continuum though of, am I doing enough? This huge high sense of responsibility that I need to be delivering.
Mm.
How about you, Robin? When did it first show up for you, and how did it affect you?
I can totally relate. So I also had I don't want to say middle class, maybe a little bit lower than middle class. We didn't have a lot of money, but it wasn't expected for me to go to university. It was luck that I got a university scholarship. And even then, my parents didn't really have any expectation of what I would pursue. But I would say the imposter syndrome, I guess what I should clarify is that it's not, if as a career coach, I often talk with men and women, and there's a job ad and there's, let's say, 5 requirements, and men will go for the job even if they only meet 3 or 4 of the requirements. Women won't. And so I don't think that is imposter syndrome. That's a lack of confidence. But what I deem as imposter syndrome is the women might go for that job, they get into the job and then go, oh crap, this is so overwhelming. What did I sign up for? And then they just get consumed by fear that somebody's going to discover they weren't meant to be in this job. It's just this kind of overwhelming fear that sticks with you. And most people can get through that hump after the first 3 months in a new job, but others just have these moments of panic of the fake it till you make it. For me, it showed up when I was thinking about this, that I had a baby. So I think I was 28, and my husband and I both got laid off in the US. We lived in Oregon, so we moved back to Arizona, which is where all the family was. And I was under pressure. Like in America, you only get, I think I had 6 weeks of leave after the baby was born, and I needed to get back in and get a job. And I had experience in IT and banking, and I had just finished a junior project manager role. So when I got to Phoenix, Arizona, where my hometown is, the recruiter shoved me into a technical writer role. That's the last thing that I would like to be doing. I don't enjoy writing. I'm good at it and was good at it in school, but it was just not my dream job. And I didn't argue. And so I was placed at American Express as a contractor. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, if this manager finds out that I'm not really trained as a technical writer and I'm not meant to be a technical writer, that they're going to let me go on the spot. Like contractors, they don't have any employment rights, so they can just let you go same day. And what I did was a bit of a diversion tactic. I went when I had idle time and found other project management work, and then worked my way into, I think in about 6 months, into a project manager contract role. So that was a bit of survival, but it was also operating from fear that I would be found out. So that's, I think, the earliest time that I felt it showed up for me. And I think, to your point, Karen, that it affects a lot of famous people. So out of these quotes, I hope everyone can see all of these quotes. Which one resonates with you the most?
I think there are 2 up there that resonate very strongly with me. The first one is Sophia Amoruso. No one's ever 100% qualified for anything. and that the answer to that is homework and preparation. I am the 52 tabs always open woman. You know, I do my homework to the nth degree. A lot of my career has been about brokering solution with stakeholder groups and finding new ways to do things in markets. And, you know, I'm the girl that sits there and works out the stakeholder map. Who is everybody interested in that decision, and what are all the agendas around that table, and what problems are they going to throw up, and how are we going to address each and every one of those? So I do my research. I'm really a big fan of doing the preparation so you don't look like an idiot on the job. And then the second one that really relates to me is Helen Mirren, not only because I think she's a fabulously stylish woman and a great actress, but nerves are part of the process for me too. I think, you know, when I reflect on my career and life achievements, they've usually been where I've been so nervous that I didn't know what I was doing and I felt a bit overwhelmed by it all. But when those nerves and that adrenaline kicks in, that's when I perform at my absolute best. So I guess those would be the two quotes that really, you know, speak to me.
I love that. And I would agree that the nerves are part of the process. I am a Gallup accredited strengths coach, and it is a American profiling tool that has 34 strengths. And it always, I think 25 million people have taken the strength survey. And it always saddens me that out of the whole list of 34 strengths, the least common strength for women is self-assurance. And for men, it's the 33rd least common strength. So it's not a common personality trait or talent that people just automatically back themselves. And that 25 million number, that's 27 countries of people. So it's a universal challenge for people to have self-assurance. It's definitely, it just pops up in different ways. And we'll talk in a minute about it's not just work, it's also in your personal life as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about who else has imposter syndrome. Karen. We've got Lady Gaga, Emma Watson, Sharon, David Bowie, and the statistic I think I added in for this webinar was that at some point in everyone's life, 70% of people experience imposter syndrome. It is more prevalent with women, but it is experienced by both sexes. What would you add to that, Karen?
Definitely it's experienced by both sexes, and I think there's a high hit rate there of really high achievers as well, like people you wouldn't anticipate that would have it, that suffer from it. That's why I actually think it's a tool that can be used for good and for power, if you recognise it and you adopt strategies with it. I think it's interesting that it has tended to be experienced more intensely by women and limit them a little more than it does for men. And I always hate to generalise, but I think there are some societal factors that underpin that particular phenomenon. I think traditionally women have had to take on, because of reasons of biology and also because of societal expectation, the roles of, you know, giving birth to children and undertaking the early care of those children, often dealing with and, you know, looking after elderly parents, the sort of social organisers within the family circle, trying to find their way in a job market or a career as well. So there are a lot of hats, and I think in the workplace there's also been a level of bias and exclusion towards women in certain professions at certain levels of corporate, you know, on the corporate ladder. So that, you know, I always found it really interesting at performance review time as an executive general manager, and I would have both my male managers and my female managers come into my office, and most of my male managers, I wouldn't say all of them, but most of them would be very, very good at banging that drum and telling me how entirely fabulous they were, and leaving me in no doubt whatsoever as to their expectations with regard to a performance bonus because of their entire fabulousness. And if I were to impart any constructive criticism to them, they would still go out of that office entirely convinced of their utter fabulousness. If I had the same, type of conversation with one of my female managers, they would not sell themselves nearly as well. They would undersell their achievements or expect that I would just notice what they'd achieved during the year. And for many of them, any constructive criticism was just devastating. It wasn't taken on board as a good thing that could work and propel them forward. It was just taken as, oh my God, I'm no good at my job. So I'd often go into counselling. I'd say, no, that's not what I'm saying. This is a way, if you're interested in, working up the chain here and getting into sort of senior management, these are things that you could do to better position yourself towards that end. So it was a very different dynamic. And I think that's because when the males looked around, this was in the banking and finance industry, when the blokes looked around, they saw a board full of blokes. And when they looked around the executive, executive general manager level or the C-suite level, again, it was a sea of blokes in grey suits. There weren't too many women. So they didn't have those sort of same role models and that sense of confidence that this was otherwise in their path, right? Women didn't have that, right? So anything that suggested that they were less than perfect was incredibly demoralizing, difficult. And I just thought that was such a shame. And so I did a lot of work with my, female managers to try and get them to understand that, the way they sold themselves in performance reviews and they had done great things was really important. They had to be able to do that, right? So I just find that very interesting. I think there's those two dynamics, societal expectation and sort of workplace cultures and norms that impact how women are reactive to imposter syndrome kind of situations or feelings.
And it reminds me of a TED Talk video that's by Brene Brown. And I think it's one of the top TED Talks, The Power of Vulnerability. And she makes a joke that her boss sits her down to tell her the 47 things that she did well and the 3 things that she can improve on. And her brain is automatically fixated on the 3 things that she can improve on. And yeah, devastation. Yes, me too. Absolutely. So I think, it is fair to say that it affects more women than men. And I think it's also because of all of the hats that women are wearing. Now we're quite comfortably working full time. We're managing the kids at home, might be dinner, cleaning, paying the bills. There's so many, they might be caring for a parent. They might have kids that have special needs. So there's just a lot to juggle now. And I was watching a video on LinkedIn. I follow the female lead, and every once in a while there's a little gem that I love. And it was this ordinary mom. She made a 1-minute video and she said, I just realized this and it blew my mind. My little girl, she's in Lion King pajamas in the back seat. She was asleep. And she said, whenever and I think her little girl had short hair. So whenever she's in pajamas with Lion King or things that aren't automatically feminine, she recognized that people talk to her daughter differently than when she's wearing pink or she's wearing a dress. And what she noticed is they would say things to her little girl in the feminine type clothing, like, oh, your dress is so pretty. You look really pretty today. That's just a lovely fabric that you're wearing. And for when she was wearing clothing that was more boyish, and she didn't mind that people mixed up, whether she was a boy or a girl, but she noticed that the language they used was, wow, you're strong, you're fast. And it was more empowering language. And I think that's kind of why I loved reading that book by Sheryl Sandberg, Lean In, because it talks about how as a little girl, she was bossy, and that was a negative label growing up. And so I always love when I hear my friends say their little girls are sassy, because I think that was me. Yeah. I was kind of pushed down to not be too sassy when I was growing up. And yeah, I just thought that video was quite powerful, because it does demonstrate that as children, even before we start school, we're kind of indoctrinated into these societal roles. And that plays a part in our confidence and our self-assurance.
Yeah.
All right. So here are some other quotes for everyone. I really love these. I'm happy that Karen found all of them.
So what's your favorite there? Which one do you relate to, Robin?
Yeah, it's actually Sophia Sotomayor. Yeah, I'm not a classic imposter syndrome. I think my self-assurance is like number 15 in the ranking of my top strengths. And I have had opportunities that I kind of sought out in my career that I haven't let fear step in the way. But when the reverse happens, when people have approached me and said, I think you should be promoted to this role, or you should take on this new responsibility, I've actually argued with them, like, are you sure? are you are you sure I'm the right person? Are you sure I meet the requirements? And I've noticed that I've done that a number of times in my career. In fact, just within the last week, I was asked if I was interested in the last month, interested in joining a board of directors. And I thought, oh, that's a bit scary for a not-for-profit. And when I thought about it and my experience, I'm like, no, I can add value. But that initial limiting belief popped its ugly head, and I'm happy to prove myself wrong over time. So that's definitely the quote that resonates with me.
Yeah.
And it's still just amazing to see some of these, Tom Hanks, somebody who you would never think had imposter syndrome. So it's actually comforting to know some of these people that are wickedly talented are still to this day think, oh, when am I going to be found out?
Yeah. And speaking of which, I think we're going to show next one of my favorite TED talk, or a snippet from one of my favorite TED talks ever, which is by Mike Cannon-Brookes from Atlassian. We're only showing a bit this evening, and I'll make some comments when it's finished about what I think the key messages from it are. But I just find it really powerful. One, because he's so down to earth and he's so damn successful. But I think he gives a really beautiful take on what imposter syndrome is and how it's shown up in his life. So let's take a look at it.
Excellent. Quite fitting.
I just love it. And I'd recommend everyone go and watch the entire talk, because he's very candid about how it's shown up in various places in his work life, but also he shares a lovely story about actually being an imposter when he met his now wife. It was really beautiful, but I think there are some really powerful messages that come out from that entire talk. And one of them is, I think, where we've already traveled, which is so many other people are experiencing it too. You're not alone. And it doesn't go away with success. There's a very high proportion of people that suffer from imposter syndrome that on any measure would be considered incredibly successful and to have made a wonderful contribution to the world around them who suffer from imposter syndrome. Scott takes a very similar view to the one I have, which is use it as a force for good, recognize it and understand that it can be a catalyst for change which benefits you. I think he makes a very powerful point in the rest of his speech, which is about never doubt yourself. Doubt your ideas, doubt the level of information you have, maybe doubt skills that you might require, but don't doubt your inherent capacity to be able to do the job, because it exists. The rest is just application, right? And I'm just such a big believer of that. And he also says it's perfectly okay to be out of your depth. Know when you're out of your depth, ask for advice from other people. Just don't let being out of your depth paralyze you. And I really find great resonance with that sentiment, because I think there have been so many times in my career where I have been completely out of my depth. I felt that initially, and I have applied myself and achieved something that I've been really proud of. And so I think, again, use it as a tool for good.
I love that. And just not getting paralyzed by it, because I have a client right now who she's worked for this company for 13 years, and they are doing some dodgy things with her job keeper. So they're basically saying, you must pay us back $7,000, oh, you can't afford that? Then let me take out all of your annual leave. And they've zeroed out her annual leave, and it's just showing on her paycheck. So she went to Fair Work Australia, and they said, oh, since you haven't actually been docked pay, we can't do anything for you. And so she's really crippled in the fact that until she goes to get another job and they actually don't pay her out that annual leave that she's legally entitled to, or until the employer is faced with a lawsuit or some sort of consequence to actually reinstate that annual leave, she's paralyzed by the thought of having to go get a new job. She hasn't had to search for a new job for the last 13 years. And the interview process, the thought of building a rapport with a new team, it's paralyzing. And so I'm really encouraging her, just, let's just apply and let's see. You don't have to accept any jobs. Let's just see if you get some callbacks. But yeah, it does occur with people, and you may have a number of factors that have happened in your life that get you to that point. But I was so proud of my 23-year-old daughter the other day. She said, Mom, I'm in nursing and I know I don't love it and I'm not going to do it forever. And I want to travel to Europe. And I said, okay, are you going to do nursing when you travel to Europe? And she said, no. And she said, and I can't let fear prevent me from going and doing that travel, because I'm just going to have to back myself that I'll come back and either get a nursing job or find something else to do. But I just don't want it to limit me in chasing that dream that I have. And I was like, I'm done. I was really excited for her to say that. But let's talk about how it shows up in other people's lives. Would you like to go through these?
I think it's important to reflect that it doesn't just show up in your work life. It can show up in your personal life as well. I mean, it goes back to those two hats things. When you're giving to your kids, you're taking away from the time you could be investing at work, and vice versa. So I think it's really important to maintain that viewpoint of it. For example, when I had my first child, I think imposter syndrome raised its head, because I doubted my capacity as a mother. I did all of the reading. I was so prepared, as I've mentioned to you before. I'd like to do my homework.
You're a learner. Yep.
And I was expecting that I would just be the world's most magnificent mother, because I was so committed and I was so overjoyed to have this child. And then the reality of having a child actually hit me. I'd never been around babies in my life, really. And one of the outpourings was that I couldn't breastfeed properly. I look back on photos from that time, and my child was not thriving and looked really ill. And I was certainly not thriving and looked really ill. And I was questioning my skill sets as a mother, and I would dutifully go down to the sort of family planning or the local clinic, as you do, and sort of see the sister and produce your little booklet showing, your child's developmental milestones. And she had me doing this chart where I would have to map out each day exactly how much time my son spent on each nipple, at what time of day, and how many nappies I was changing, and all of this. And not convinced, because he still wasn't thriving, putting on weight, she then decided, and it made no logical sense to me, because I was forever changing nappies, right? But I just felt that I obviously didn't know what I was doing, and I was a failure as a breastfeeder, and so I had to listen to this person. And she decided that what I needed to do was, when I didn't actually have a nipple in my son's mouth, I should attach it to a breast pump and just be producing more supply, because perhaps what was happening is that, I was breastfeeding, but I wasn't actually delivering anything much in terms of supply or quality supply. So if I just became a cow and pumped out all the time, the quality of the milk would improve, and so would my son's weight and, level of thriving. And when I was just so exhausted from all this crap, I just decided I'm not doing this anymore. I just took some confidence that I wasn't a complete moron and got a referral to a specialist pediatrician, who diagnosed that my son was lactose intolerant. So while he was crying, and he was crying all the time, like I had this child strapped to me when he wasn't attached to a nipple, he was strapped to me and I was walking around like trying to soothe him. And I would look at that clock, and if it was 6 o'clock and my husband wasn't home from work and I just needed to hand the child out, I was ready to tear his eyes out. It was a bit like that. So I wasn't actually being the loving, nurturing goddess that I'd hoped to be. But from the day that we got, went to that pediatrician who diagnosed lactose intolerance and I embraced bottle feeding, life just transformed, and so did my son.
Mm.
So, I think you've got to recognize that it's something that can intrude on your personal life as well. And again, you've got to trust yourself and trust your instincts. But it's just, in this case, it was a lack of knowledge, not of, passion or application or anything else. It was just a lack of knowledge that my son had, something that my breastfeeding was not helping. So,
Absolutely. And I can remember when it showed up for me in a non-work situation. I was getting ready to separate from my husband, and he made a statement to me. He was always like, he was a stockbroker and he was very good with finances. And he made a statement to me that there's no way that I could effing ever manage my own finances. And it just kind of stunned me, because I had given him control of all our finances up to that point. And that weekend, I completely studied all the bank statements. I recognized, how much disposable income I actually had. And today I'm so proud, I'm financially independent. I have my own business. I would love to retire at an earlier age. I'm still working towards that. But yeah, it's been something that, it's planted a seed in my head that, well, is he right? But yeah, it does show up in different ways, not just in the work setting.
Yeah.
Okay, and so tell us about the 5 types. We've got about 15 minutes, so I do want to encourage questions if people have them.
Quickly. So there's a book that's really interesting by Valerie Young called Secret Thoughts of Successful Women. And she creates sort of 5 competency types that she believes a lot of women fall into. And I don't think anyone should look at this as a rigid framework, but I think it's really useful for analysing how imposter syndrome might manifest itself in your life and then construct a strategy to deal with that. So the 5 types are perfectionist, and I touched on them earlier because a lot of my female managers were perfectionists. So they cannot take constructive feedback. Everything has to be perfect or it's a disaster. Then you have the superwoman who just takes on way too much. She's the first into the office. She's the last to leave. She's just trying to do everything, and it's all too much. You have your natural genius, which is our woman at the blackboard there. She probably was very academically, he or she, I should say, was academically, gifted as a young child. And then there is a concern that if they don't grasp a new concept immediately or before everybody else, that somehow they're a huge failure and that they, are an imposter. Then you have your soloist, a lovely lady tinkling the ivories up there, who has to do everything by herself. She just doesn't believe in delegation. Nobody can do it as well as he or she can. Everything's on their own. And then you have the expert. And this was something I alluded to earlier when I was, early in my legal career, that they believe they have to know everything within their area of expertise, and they live in constant fear that they're going to be asked a question within that area of expertise that they won't be able to answer. So they're just reading and studying all the time. And I just find that very interesting because I have met all those personality types and I've had fragments of each of them manifest themselves in my body.
Same. I think I started out in my early career kind of the superwoman. I worked at American Express and my department was in India, Australia, England, East Coast of the US, like it was just global meetings all the time, 6 a.m., 10 p.m. And it was just not sustainable. But I think now I probably resonate more with the perfectionist and really having a bit more time to slow down and do things correctly. And so when it's not correct, I really lose sleep and yeah, just try to fixate on how am I going to fix it and prevent it from happening again. So, and that's actually happening more right now because of lockdown and because we have a bit more idle time. It's really hard for me to shut down those thoughts. So I love this SWOT yourself. So tell us about this.
Yeah, so the idea of this was harking back to my comment earlier that you should recognise imposter syndrome as a catalyst for change and a power for good, really. And I think that requires that sometimes we just sort of sit down and do a stock take of our strengths and our values and what we bring to the table. And I think that can be important in both a private setting and it can be important in a work setting. And so in a private setting, I don't think you need to go into a huge in-depth analysis or a more in-depth analysis like I'll suggest in a work setting in a minute. But I think it is important to sort of sit down and just do a reality check and remind yourself what you bring to the table, what you've achieved and what's important to you and where you'd like to go. And I found that was really important in lockdown last year for me. I had a situation where I was in lockdown by myself. I reached for my phone one morning and I had an email from my partner of 25 years who'd been working overseas, headed disclosure, informing me that he'd fallen in love with someone else and was ending our marriage. And to me, that was just...
So the email subject line was...
The email subject line was disclosure, and it was terminating our marriage because he'd fallen in love with someone else. And, you know, we'd always been the couple that were considered to have the perfect relationship and perfect marriage. And so when something like that happens, you think, did I not know this person? Like, how does that even happen? And what have I done to contribute to this situation? Do I deserve to be in this position? And it just set, you know, a storm of emotions at play, as you can imagine. And one of those emotions was fear, because as someone who has advise lots of people on risk management and empowering themselves, I'd gotten myself into a situation where all of my assets were jointly owned. I didn't have my own bank account. There was no money in our joint bank account. He'd been working overseas for a number of years while we were managing a long distance relationship and visiting each other a lot. But because of exchange rate concerns, he had all the cash over there, not over here.
Oh my gosh, my heart's
I had gone from a very high-powered, very high-paid career to making sacrifices to raise a family as I wanted to raise a family. And because we had, you know, both been successful in our careers, had made a mutual decision that, you know, I could give back to community and sort of take on, you know, the not-for-profit charity role that I'm doing now, which, you know, doesn't give me an income to sustain the lifestyle that I'd been living. First world problem, I know, but it was suddenly really scary, right? That I could be in this position and not have known my husband was capable of that sort of thing. Mind you, it shocked the entire family, including his parents. But it was just so extraordinary. And so what was really, I don't want to harp on about it, but what was really important for me was sitting down and understanding who I am and what I've achieved and what I brought to the table. And this is actually how I met Robin, because in the context of doing that, I wanted to get some career clarity about what it was I should do. And you know, I was running scared at that time as well, I have to confess. And one of the things that I did that was so beneficial to me was Robin made me go out and ask people, what is unique about me? What am I good at? And when am I at my best? And I asked a variety of people that question. I asked family members, I asked friends from the past, I asked colleagues from the past, people I work with now.
You asked
my kids. And it was just so life-affirming to get those answers. And sometimes we all need that, right? You need to be reminded of what your values are, what you bring to other people, what they see you as. And that just gave me the strength to rally myself and remind myself that, hey, I'm not taking the shit, you know? And I went in and fought for myself. You know, I had to make some really hard decisions, but I reminded myself what I'd contributed financially and in every other way. Yeah. And was going to be sure that I fought for myself and my children to take out of that what we deserved. And I did. Yeah. So I just wanted to say, you know, we need to do that stock take occasionally in the personal and in the professional to get us
Yeah.
where we need to go.
And just for those who may not know Karen, she was the head of risk and compliance at the ASX.
Not
Is that
really.
right?
I was the chief integrity officer at the ASX, and before that,
Okay,
I was their
that's bigger.
general. Yeah, before that, I was their general counsel.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And yeah, so it was a high powered job, and yeah. This, you actually did this assessment when you got that email last year, and kind of, it was a bit also affirming of
yeah. So
how you
this,
felt about yourself.
yeah, it was great. And so this is more of the analysis I'd suggest in a work or professional context, where you just go into a little bit more depth about what your strengths and weaknesses are and what the environmental scan would be, both from a threat perspective and an opportunity perspective. And a lot of people will have had experience doing that in a work context for their organisation. But I kind of think when you're assessing where you want to be in your career, then you do a SWOT analysis as the CEO of your own life, right? So you look at the things that you need to provide more resources towards, and you look at the things that are going to be risks for you down the track, and you work on strategies to deal with that.
And for example, you're taking the Harvard course now.
Yeah, so I've decided that, you know, my values really align with me with for purpose roles, and I'm prepared to sacrifice the dollars that go with that. But I'm not sure, you know, whether I stay in the particular role I have forever or move on to something else. But I thought one thing that I could do was further my knowledge about public leadership and evidence-based decision-making and policy formation. So with the opportunity of COVID to have a little bit more time, I've been doing that. And interesting for me, when I started, I thought, God, am I going to be able to Harvard? Am I going to be able to do that? But it's been really very enjoyable. And I think it's an exercise which lends great perspective because it's an international cohort, and your problems living here in the beautiful eastern suburbs of Sydney are put into perspective when you're dealing with people that are dealing with massive poverty in India or wherever it might be.
I love it. So we've got some questions coming in, and this is a list that Karen and I made. And so great questions about, you know, if the SWOT analysis is more difficult for you to tackle, and I can understand that. There are a few strategies here that we've laid out, and the 3 questions that Karen just mentioned are here. And I have to give credit to my dear friend, Corinne, who gave this technique. She's another coach that I worked with a few years ago. And it's so powerful for my clients that are low confidence. Just sending that email out saying, what is unique about me? What am I good at? When have you seen me at my best? And the feedback that comes in, like, it's super powerful. And as you can hear Karen describe, it was really good for her. And the other things that I did for myself was, I was actually supposed to give an imposter talk a while back. And I sat down, my husband made the suggestion, why don't you make a list of all of your proudest achievements? And what about the times when you proved someone wrong? And I was really surprised after I sat down and made that list. So look, I remembered things like when I was 16, my best friend who got pregnant, to my surprise, I didn't know that she and her boyfriend were having relations. And I don't know why this came out, but it's burned in my brain that she said I wouldn't make a good mom. And so that just really struck me and struck the doubt. And when I finally did become a mom, I know, right? I was told that my Australian husband wasn't the marrying kind. I was told by a family member that it was a fluke that I got an executive job, and I've got my own business now. So those were things where I made a list of like 10 things when I proved people wrong. And the achievements, you know, I had like 15 things that I had done throughout my career and my personal life that I was like, wow, I am really proud of that. And I don't think enough people take the time to actually make that list. So those are my 3 kind of favorites, number 2, 3, and 8. And then I followed this lady that's called Project Hot Mess, and she just sent out a golden email of like the 9 best TED Talks to build your confidence, and the 11 TED Talks that can help you get the courage to start a new business. Or like, she just had all of these categories in TED Talks because she said, I'm a TED Talk addict. So I believe that there is some power in the TED Talks. Let me just see what other questions we have. Is the Clifton Strengths Finder survey with the 34 strengths? Yes, it's got 2 names. Clifton is the psychologist that did the research for 30 years, Donald Clifton. And he interviewed like 1.7 million people. And Gallup when he died, Gallup bought the rights to his intellectual property. So Gallup owns the actual survey. And I pretty much 90% of my clients, I do the strength survey with them so that it's confidence building. It helps them talk about their brand. It gives them a language. And yeah, we can see like what strengths match careers and what makes them happy. Good question. All right, so we got more coming in. Will the recording be available? Yes, we will send the playback to everyone that registered for this session. And if they didn't, but they subscribe to my newsletter, I will probably share it in that. I do a newsletter to my audience every fortnight, and it has success stories for people. It has tips that can range from LinkedIn, resume, interview skills, all kinds of good stuff. Let's see, what other questions do we have? I hope that you guys enjoyed this session about imposter syndrome. Sorry, I'm just checking. How do we subscribe to your newsletter? Good question. So you should go to my website, and there's a pop-up that asks if you want to subscribe. And if you go on other places, it'll allow you to fill in your information on the contact page if you want to subscribe there too. And as far as your weaknesses, one of the rules of thumb with your strengths is they can become your weaknesses. So for example, I have communication. I can be very chatty. My kids are like, Mom, can you just go to the store and not chat everybody up? But I recognize when that strength can become a weakness, and I watch body language. I start asking questions if it feels like I'm dominating the conversation. So Karen, what would you like to add to weaknesses?
Well, my biggest Clifton strength was responsibility, which is also my weakness. I have a real problem with saying no. Like, you know, I've gotten better as I've gotten older about not allowing people to jump the monkey on my back, but I still find myself, you know, head of the body corporate, head of the, you know, parents association. I just take on stuff all the time that I really shouldn't take on because I just have this higher sense of responsibility. So it is good because when I'm in a job, you know, I'm going to deliver for you. But it's not good because I take on too many jobs.
And PETA asked, not sure how to address the threats and opportunities. So what would you say to that, Karen?
I think that's really an environmental scan kind of analysis. So, you know, think about the way I approach it is I think about where it is I want to position myself or what I want to achieve in my existing job, and where there might be opportunities for me to further my knowledge and skills. It goes back to what Mike Cannon-Brookes said, like never question yourself, just question whether you have the right toolkits, you know, the right toolkit, you know, the knowledge that you need to do what you need to do. So for me, the opportunity was, in my case, to do a little bit more training and certification, you know, would assist me with leadership roles in the not-for-profit sector. In the context of my personal life in the divorce, I studied up on what I was entitled to and what the process was, and actually handled the divorce and negotiation myself because I knew that person better than anybody else on this planet, and I knew I was going to get the best result.
And you're able to pick the job, you know, pick the dream job. You're not in a rush, so it's nice.
Exactly. And so I think the opportunities that come, particularly in the current climate, with taking networking opportunities and finding people with common interests that can help you get to where you want to go. So that's the opportunities. And the threats for me are just always understanding the landscape that I'm operating in. You know, is there a competitive threat to the kind of job I'm doing now? You know, a lot of jobs won't exist in 10 years. Where should I be positioning myself if I feel that I need to get out of that particular job, and what skills will I need to get there? So it's really about looking at all the factors around me to understand how they impact me and how I can pull the right levers to help me and those I love and care about get where they want to go.
And here's what we'll take one last great question. And I think people are starting to sign off, which is perfectly fine. But this is a really good question. What if your weakness is age and the threat of ageism? And I'm going to take us out and yeah, exactly. So I am 51 and I help quite a few people that are my age or, you know, in the 60s. And I've been excited, particularly this year, I've had a few of those clients and they've gotten the interviews. 2 out of 3 are successful in getting the job. I think ageism is real. I think it does happen, and it requires more networking and it requires more practice in your interview and your responses and more polish in your resume, simplifying. It's not just about achievements, it's about agility and able to work with others and the wisdom that you bring. And so being able to market that in a positive way is so important. And if you don't have that fake it till you make it attitude, it will be a struggle for you to overcome that when you're searching for new jobs. But networking is definitely a part. You can still show your enthusiasm. And I have been so excited that some of the folks in, you know, the above 50 and 60 range have been successful in getting new jobs for the government, healthcare, Greenpeace, one of them. So anyway, yes, there are success stories out there, but it is harder. And there's some little things that we can do on your resume that only show the last 15 years of your experience. That's all that really matters. And other things that we can succinctly summarize in your achievements. I'm getting lots of thank yous, Karen, now. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to play our little anthem that we arranged for you at the end. And thanks for joining us today, and hope you have a great evening.